Some might say it is not right to compare an action epic alongside more of a classic war movie, but today I will compare the new Odyssey movie from Christopher Nolan alongside Troy from 2004 and actually tell you why the latter is a better movie, which I feel is fair because they both are an adaptation after all of the poem work written by Homer. First and foremost, in Troy from 2004, we see more iconic dialogue. You see the power talk from Agamemnon, played by Brian Cox, the talk of a warrior slash wisdom from Achilles, played by Brad Pitt, the representation of greed from Menelaus, played by Brendan Gleeson, and a noble king of Troy, Priam, played by Peter O'Toole. In the Odyssey, however, a lot of the dialogue is not that engaging, and a lot of the time it is about these suitors and guys telling stories from the past, which is not always that entertaining. Additionally, you see this iconic battle scene between Hector and Achilles right near the end, which is the best and most intense battle scene in the movie. The Odyssey lacks this type of iconic battle scene, but of course the Battle of Troy and Trojan Horse becomes iconic in the story, but it misses that iconic feature when the same scene is shown 5 or 6 times. Furthermore, you see no adventurous freedom in the cast to diversify it, to for example make Helen of Troy black to modernize the story and make it feel less authentic in the way they try to tell the story. In a Troy movie, it feels more like it should be in a Greek society or a Trojan kingdom. Of course, the screen time of that character, Helen of Troy, is not important in the new Odyssey movie, but it is still a spit against Greek history to make this adventurous freedom in a cast, where also Sinon is played by Elliot Page, formerly a woman, portrayed to be the bravest soldier Odysseus ever knew. Another reason why Troy is a better movie is that you see a way better structure with no flashbacks, less storytelling from what has already happened. You have one author voice and tell the story as it is all the way through, which makes the story and the movie easier to follow. While in the Odyssey, we see different people that keep telling the same story, and it becomes harder and messier to follow and get engaged in the movie. Said in final words, Troy from 2004 is the movie that is simply designed to entertain, which never slows down or feels slow or dragged. Already inside the first 20 minutes, the first dramatic scene happens when Helen is kidnapped from Sparta from the Prince Paris of Troy and becomes Helen of Troy instead. While it takes 30/40 minutes before we see anything dramatic happening in the Odyssey, where the first sense of drama is when Odysseus and his crew meets the Cyclops inside a cave. In the story, Helen of Troy is more of a main character, where she, in the Odyssey, becomes more of a footnote and does not have an impact. But I guess she might have been recasted as a black woman because she is not that important in the Odyssey. At least that is one of the theories that can be applied. If we compare the movies heart for heart and like for like, the Odyssey is more of an action epic, and Troy is a movie bathed in war that tells in grave detail about the Battle of Troy and what happens there. But it also only shows the Trojan horse trick only once, while the Odyssey has this weakness that they need to show us this scene 5 or 6 times. At the end of the movie, when Matt Damon comes back and tells that story for the 5th or 6th time or something like that, it is almost like he goes in some kind of loop together with the same scene. And what happens after they make that ambush attack at night inside the gates of Troy, which I think actually is one of the most profound weaknesses of the Odyssey, that it wants to get that point across 5 or 6 times. We get that the Trojan horse is important the first or the second time, guys. To sum it up, in this case, Troy shows the war only once, but builds up to it a lot and tells of the consequences after that, while the Odyssey constantly takes away where it tries to tell about the choices and drags out the emotional tales of the warriors rather than the actual fighting, which I gotta say, guys, is not always that entertaining, no matter how you put it. Another reason why Troy is better than the Odyssey is that while the Odyssey often has more tension in the battle scenes, we actually see fewer battle scenes, while Troy has them in abundance. In wiser words, you could say that Troy feels like an epic war movie and makes you feel that naturally, while the Odyssey tries too hard to make it epic but fails to do that naturally. Another gigantic reason why Troy is better than the Odyssey is because it is way easier to get immersed into the movie. The reason why is because the movie never feels slow/dragged, while in the Odyssey a lot of the scenes are less engaging, like the suitors in his guest house, Like the strange woman turning men into pigs, Troy is simply a movie that never slows down, while the Odyssey slows down too much. Additionally, more actors do good performances in Troy from 2004. Brad Pitt as Achilles is one of his best performances as an actor. Brendan Gleeson as Menelaus, the greedy brother of Agamemnon, that is together with Helen of Troy. Eric Bana as the Prince Hector that fights in this iconic battle scene. The King of Troy performance by Peter O'Toole. Also, the actual Helen of Troy, now in a more natural-looking appearance, played by Diane Kruger, and she has a much better character performance than the actress in the Odyssey. Although, of course, she has a larger role, she still does that one much better. We can also mention Orlando Bloom as the Prince Paris, but nonetheless, in the Odyssey, only Matt Damon as Odysseus and Robert Pattinson as the sleazy Antonius do good performances in that movie, which shows that the cast in Troy is much stronger than the cast 22 years later. Furthermore, again in Troy, guys, you see more edge of your seat moments, while the Odyssey desperately lacks this type of moments. For example, at the end when we see the ambush attack, the iconic duel between Hector and Achilles, when his cousin dies, there are just so many moments to choose from. That same thing cannot be said about the Odyssey, which really only has the bow challenge near the end and the Trojan horse trick shown 5 or 6 times. Furthermore, Troy has vivid tension between the characters, and the Odyssey has that a little bit between Odysseus and his crew, but not enough in my opinion, because there's so much tension between Menelaus and Paris, between Achilles, Briseis, and against the king, Agamemnon, that he believes is just a greedy idiot. You never feel that same tension developing between the characters in the Odyssey. Additionally, the Battle of Troy, guys, is built up to be and becomes more epic when it is not told as some sort of fairy tale that has already happened in flashbacks, but actually happened in real time. This way, the moment when Troy is attacked at night becomes more epic, and it is not just washed away in a badly built loop of flashbacks. Before the end here, there are 2 more features we need to talk about that makes Troy better than the Odyssey. First, we need to talk about the characters in the crew of Odysseus. I feel a lot of these so-called warriors/soldiers, especially Sano, although he never actually fights in the new movie, a lot of them does not look or feel like real Greek warriors, while in Troy, we have a big, menacing guy like Ajax. Achilles looks like a warrior, in addition to his crew, the way they are built, and all the armies you see in Troy look way more powerful and feel way more authentic than in the Odyssey, which just tries to give different people of different skin color roles and fails to make the cast look like actual Greek warriors/soldiers. The only man that looks like a warrior in this movie might be Matt Damon, and that's a huge problem. And again, it is a huge miss for the authentic feeling of the Odyssey that nobody really talks about because they are afraid to mock the makers of the movie. The second thing we need to talk about are the inclusion of gods in the story. In the Odyssey, the gods show themselves a lot of times, and the main character played by Matt Damon talks to Athena and a lot of other gods, which differs a lot from Troy, where the gods never show themselves. That they show themselves as animals in the Odyssey is fair enough, but I feel the whole Zendaya performance is just a filler performance that does not actually need to be there. That Zendaya has a place in this movie is just awkward, because if you cut out all her lines from the movie and drop the Athena character, nobody would notice. But the same thing could be said about the Black Helen of Troy character. Needless to say, to not have the gods show themselves feels better, like they do in Troy, especially when it becomes so awkward and never feels important for the story. Nevertheless, now I made a rattle monologue about why Troy is better than the Odyssey, and if you made it this far, a huge shout out to you. By the way, Troy is an 8 out of 10, guys, and the Odyssey is a 7 out of 10.